wind howled across the frozen wilderness, cutting through the trees like a predator chasing its prey. Snow blanketed everything, stretching endlessly in every direction. The forest, once filled with life, had become a graveyard of ice and silence. 3 wolves struggled through the storm: Fang, Luna, and their pup, Echo. Fang, the father and leader, moved forward with slow, determined steps. His black fur was streaked with frost, his ribs pressing against his thinning skin. He had once been a powerful hunter, the protector of a thriving pack. Now only his mate and their son remained. Luna walked beside him, her thick gray coat reduced to a brittle layer of fur and ice. She was weak, her legs trembling from exhaustion, but she pressed on, knowing that stopping meant never rising again. Between them, Echo, their only surviving pup, struggled to keep up. His small legs sank deep into the snow, his breast quick and shallow. Hunger gnawed at his tiny frame, his once playful energy drained by the cruel winter. They had been walking for days. The rivers were frozen, the prey had vanished, and the cold had stolen nearly everything from them. Fang knew they were running out of time. If they did not find shelter soon, they would not survive. He lifted his head, his yellow eyes scanning the landscape. The blizzard made it difficult to see, but he pushed forward. His ears twitched, listening past the roaring wind for any sound, anything that could signal hope. Then, a scent. It was faint, nearly lost in the storm, but unmistakable. Smoke. Fang froze. His breath billowed in the icy air as he tried to confirm what he had smelled. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant warmth. Warmth meant humans. He hesitated. Humans were unpredictable. Some hunted wolves, others were kind, but all were dangerous in their own way. His instincts told him to turn back, but there was no turning back. Luna stumbled beside him, her legs buckling, before she caught herself. Echo let out a small, weak whimper, his tiny body shivering violently. Fang clenched his jaw. They could not last another night in the cold. With a final glance at the snow-covered wilderness behind them, he made his choice. He turned toward the source of the smoke. As they moved through the storm, the scent grew stronger. Soon, a dark shape loomed ahead, a cabin. Its wooden structure stood against the snow-covered hillside, a faint glow visible through a small window. Thick plumes of smoke curled from the chimneys, disappearing into the sky. Fang slowed, his body tense. This was dangerous. They were stepping into human territory, something no wild wolf did unless they had no other choice. But this was their last choice. The scent of food, though faint, reached his nose, sending a painful clench through his stomach. Echo whimpered again, his tiny frame trembling harder at the smell. Luna's ears twitched, her body swaying slightly. Then, a sound. The front door of the cabin creaked open. A man stepped out. He was tall, wrapped in thick, fur-lined clothing. A rifle was slung over his shoulder, but his posture was relaxed, not immediately threatening. Fang tensed, positioning himself in front of Luna and Echo. His fur bristled, his lips curling slightly. He would not let this human harm them. The man didn't raise his weapon. Instead, he stood still, his piercing blue eyes locked onto the wolves. His breath came in soft, measured puffs as he studied them. Then slowly he knelt. Fang's ears twitched in surprise. This was not an attack posture. The man reached into his coat, his movements slow and deliberate. Fang's muscles coiled, ready to flee. But then the scent hit him. Meat. A chunk of cooked meat, still warm, was held out in the man's gloved hand. The smell wrapped around Fang like a vice, making his stomach twist painfully. Echo took a shaky step forward, his tiny nose twitching wildly. The man's voice was quiet, calm. "You must be starving." Fang hesitated. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious, to never trust humans so easily. But his family was starving. Luna was weak. Echo was fading fast. The man remained still, his expression calm, patient. Fang snatched the meat from his hand. He retreated instantly, expecting a trap, but none came. The man simply watched, his face unreadable. Echo let out another tiny whimper, his eyes locked onto the man's hand. The man chuckled softly, reaching into his coat again and pulling out another piece of meat. He tossed it gently onto the snow. Fang's ears flicked back. Was this a trick? A test? Luna, barely able to stand, crawled forward and took the offering. The man sighed, watching them with something that Fang didn't understand. Not fear, not hostility, something else. "I guess you're not going anywhere, huh?" Fang stared at him, chewing slowly. His muscles were still tight with tension, but something in the man's presence was different. He smelled of earth fire and something unexpected. Kindness. The storm raged around them, but for the first time in days, the wolves felt something new. Hope. The storm howled through the trees, but the wolves barely noticed now. The scent of meat filled the air, overpowering even the cold. Fang chewed slowly, his sharp teeth tearing through the warmth that spread through his body. Luna finished her portion quickly, licking her lips and nudging Echo toward the piece the man had thrown. The pup hesitated, his small ears flicking back as he glanced up at Fang. Fang gave a soft grunt of approval. Echo stepped forward, his tiny paws pressing into the snow. His muzzle twitched, inhaling the scent of food before he carefully bit down. The moment the flavor hit his tongue, his hunger overtook his fear, and he devoured the offering in seconds. The man remained kneeling, watching them with an unreadable expression. He did not move for his weapon or try to approach. He simply observed, his breath slow and steady. Fang's golden eyes remained locked onto him. Trusting a human was dangerous. He had seen what their kind could do. Wolves shot without warning their pelts, taking their bodies left in the snow. But this man had not attacked. Instead, he had offered them life. Luna lowered herself into the snow, exhaustion making her body sag. She was still shivering, her fur crusted with ice. Echo, now with a full belly, curled beside her, pressing his tiny body into her warmth. The man exhaled, breath curling into the air like smoke. Slowly he stood, Fang tensed again and watching as the man turned toward the cabin. Then, he did something unexpected. He left the door open. Warmth spilled from the doorway, the scent of firewood and shelter drifting toward them. The man disappeared inside his footsteps, soft against the wooden floor. Fang's ears flicked. Was this an invitation or a trap? Luna whimpered, her body trembling violently. She could not withstand the cold much longer. Fang stepped closer to the cabin. His instincts screamed caution, but survival outweighed fear. He moved forward, stepping onto the wooden porch. The surface felt strange beneath his paws, unnatural. The cabin's warmth wrapped around him. Fire crackled inside, its golden light flickering against the walls. Behind him, Luna struggled to stand. Fang turned, stepping back and nudging her gently. She leaned into him, her legs unsteady. The man's voice came from inside, quiet, patient. "Come in if you want." Fang hesitated. A human's den was dangerous ground. But Luna let out another weak whimper, and Echo pressed himself into her fur, his tiny body barely holding onto its warmth. Fang made his decision. He nudged Luna again, guiding her forward. She stumbled onto the wooden steps, Echo following close behind. The moment they crossed the threshold, a wave of heat washed over them. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Inside the cabin was small but sturdy. A fire burned in the stone hearth flames, dancing against the walls. A wooden table stood in the corner, chairs pushed beneath it. Shelves lined one wall, filled with objects Fang did not understand. The man knelt by the fire, setting his rifle against the wall. He did not reach for it again. Instead, he pulled a thick blanket from a pile nearby and placed it on the floor. "You can stay here," he said simply. Luna collapsed onto the blanket, her body sinking into the warmth. Echo curled against her side, immediately letting out a soft sigh. Fang remained standing. His ears twitched, his muscles tense. He watched the man closely, waiting for deception. But the man only leaned back against the wall, stretching his legs with a tired sigh. His hands rested on his knees, his posture relaxed. Fang took a slow step forward. The warmth of the fire was unlike anything he had ever felt. It was a different kind of warmth, one that did not fade, did not shift with the wind. It wrapped around him, sinking into his bones. For the first time in days, Fang let himself breathe. The man's voice was quiet. "You're lucky you found this place." Fang flicked his ears but remained silent. The man chuckled softly. "Not much of a talker, huh?" Fang narrowed his eyes slightly, but the man only smiled. It was not a threatening smile, not the kind humans gave before raising a weapon. It was something else. Luna's breathing evened out. She was still weak, but her body had stopped shaking. Echo was already asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Fang took another cautious step closer. positioning himself between his family and the man. A long silence stretched between them. Then the man yawned and leaned his head back against the wooden wall. "Well, get some rest," he murmured, voice thick with exhaustion. Fang did not relax. Not yet. But as the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, he allowed himself to watch instead of run. He did not know this man. He did not trust him. But for now, in the warmth of this strange den, with Luna and Echo safe beside him, Fang made a quiet promise. If this man proved dangerous, Fang would strike first. But if he was not, perhaps, just perhaps, this was where their survival began. Fang did not sleep. He remained standing near Luna and Echo, his golden eyes fixed on the man. The warmth of the fire softened Winter's sharp bite, but he did not let his guard down. Humans were unpredictable. One moment they offered food, the next they raised weapons. Luna breathed deeply, her body no longer trembling. Echo twitched in his sleep, nestled against her belly, his tiny paws flexing as if chasing a dream. The man stirred. Fang's ears perked, his body tensing. The man merely stretched, adjusting his position against the wooden wall. His rifle remained untouched, resting where he had set it earlier. A long silence stretched between them. Then the man spoke. "You don't trust me?" Fang's ears flicked. The man's voice was quiet, thoughtful. He wasn't expecting an answer. Fang had none to give. The man exhaled and looked toward the fire. "Can't blame you. Wolves don't usually come near humans. And when they do, it doesn't end well." Fang didn't move. The man reached toward a metal pot near the fire, pulling it closer. The scent of broth filled the air. His movements were slow, careful, as if aware of the watchful eyes upon him. "You're smart," the man continued, pouring steaming liquid into a wooden bowl. "I can see that." Fang's ears twitched, but he gave no reaction. He did not care for the man's words, only his actions. The man set the bowl on the floor just beyond Fang's reach. The scent of meat and herbs drifted toward him. His stomach clenched painfully. "I don't expect you to come closer," the man said. "But it's here if you need it." Fang remained still. His hunger gnawed at him, but instinct held him back. The man leaned back again, crossing his arms. He seemed tired, but his gaze remained sharp. "Do whatever you want," he muttered. Fang waited. Minutes passed. The man's breathing slowed, becoming deep and even. Finally, Fang stepped forward. Each movement was slow, calculated. He sniffed the bowl, ears pricked for any sudden shift in the man's posture. The scent of the broth was rich, warm. Carefully, he lapped at the surface. It was hot, strange, but it filled the hollow ache in his belly. He finished quickly, then stepped back to his original spot. The man hadn't moved. He was either asleep or pretending. Fang lay down, his body curled protectively around Luna and Echo. His ears remained alert, but exhaustion weighed heavily on him. For the first time in weeks, he was warm. Fed safe for now. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, only the fire flickered. Sleep finally took him. A sound woke him. Fang's eyes snapped open. The fire had burned lower, casting long shadows on the walls. The man was awake, standing near a shelf, rummaging through something. Fang lifted his head, watching closely. The man glanced at him. "Relax," he murmured. "Just getting something." Fang did not relax. The man pulled out a thick piece of fur and returned to his spot near the fire. He spread it over his legs, then glanced at Fang again. "You don't have to stay on guard all night," he said. "I'm not going to hurt you." Fang said nothing, but he did not look away. The man huffed a quiet laugh. "Guess I'll have to earn that trust, huh?" He leaned his head back, closing his eyes. Fang remained awake, watching. The fire crackled. Echo stirred slightly in his sleep, letting out a tiny yawn. The man had not harmed them. Not yet. Fang let his head rest against his paws. His eyes stayed open a little longer. Eventually, the warmth lulled him back into sleep. Morning came. Fang awoke to the scent of something cooking. His ears flicked as he lifted his head. The man was near the stove preparing food. Steam curled from a pot, filling the room with a scent both foreign and familiar. Luna stirred beside him, her movements slow but stronger than before. Echo stretched, blinking sleepily. Fang stood. The man glanced at him. "Morning." Fang ignored him, sniffing the air. His stomach clenched again, reminding him that he had not eaten much. The man turned back to his task, scooping food onto a plate. He moved with practiced ease, his actions deliberate. He did not seem concerned about the wolves watching him. Luna sat up slowly. Her fur was no longer crusted with ice, but she still looked weak. "She needs more food," he said. "You all do." He set another bowl near the fire filled with steaming meat and broth. This time he didn't wait for Fang to take it. He simply stepped away, giving them space. Luna sniffed at the food before lapping at the broth. Echo watched her before cautiously joining in. Fang waited a moment longer before eating. The man leaned against the table, arms crossed. "I don't know what brought you here," he said, voice quieter now, "but it's clear you had nowhere else to go." Fang did not respond, but the truth was undeniable. They had been starving, freezing, dying, and now they were here. The man sighed. Fang watched him carefully. The man turned toward the window. The storm had finally passed. The world outside was white, untouched. The wolves had survived the night, but the true test was still ahead. Fang remained alert as the morning stretched on. The fire crackled softly, filling the cabin with warmth. The man moved about, gathering supplies, preparing for whatever came next. Luna rested, curled around Echo. The pup had regained some of his energy, his tiny paws twitching as he dreamed. The sight was comforting, yet Fang stayed on edge. The man finally turned toward him. "You're still watching me, huh?" Fang didn't react. The man sighed. "Guess I can't blame you." He moved toward a wooden cabinet, pulling out food. The scent of dried meat filled the air. Fang's ears flicked. The man tore off a piece and held it up. "Here." Fang hesitated. The previous night, the man had left food without forcing interaction. But this was different. Luna stirred, lifting her head. Echo peeked from beneath her fur, watching. The man didn't move closer. "You don't have to take it from me," he said, tossing the piece near Fang's paws. "But if you do, maybe that means you're starting to trust me." Fang's muscles tensed. This was a test. For a long moment, he did nothing. The fire crackled, filling the silence. Then slowly, Fang lowered his head and picked up the meat. The man exhaled, a hint of something almost like relief crossing his face. Luna watched closely, her blue eyes filled with quiet contemplation. Echo, still young and unaware of the complexities of survival, yawned and stretched his tiny legs. The man sat down, resting his elbows on his knees. "You must have been through a lot," he murmured. Fang swallowed the meat and lifted his head. The man continued, almost as if speaking to himself. "Most wolves wouldn't come near a human, let alone step inside his home." Fang flicked his tail. He didn't need to be reminded of their desperation. The man smiled slightly. "Guess that makes you different." A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the storm had finally passed, leaving a thick blanket of snow across the land. The morning light filtered through the small window, casting long shadows along the wooden floor. Fang took in the details of the cabin. It was small but sturdy, built from thick logs reinforced with stones at the corners. A table stood near the far wall, covered in tools and supplies. A rifle leaned against the wooden frame of the window, within easy reach. Despite the man's kindness, the weapon was a reminder of what he was capable of. Luna shifted beside him, her fur brushing against his. Her body was no longer trembling with cold, and color had returned to her nose and paws. She was healing. Echo, oblivious to the tension in the room, wandered closer to the fire. His tiny paws left faint imprints on the wooden floor. He sniffed curiously at a fur blanket before settling down near its warmth. The man chuckled. "You're a brave little guy, huh?" Echo blinked up at him. His tail twitched slightly but did not tuck under his belly. Unlike Fang, he had not yet learned to fear humans. The man watched him for a moment before reaching for a piece of dried meat. He placed it near Echo, then leaned back, allowing the pup to make the choice. Echo sniffed at it cautiously. His tiny nose twitched before he took a small, hesitant bite. Fang remained motionless, watching. The man exhaled. "Well, that's a start." Another long silence settled between them. The cabin creaked softly as the wind howled outside. The scent of pine wood and smoke filled the air. Finally, the man stood. "I need to check the traps," he muttered, mostly to himself. He grabbed his coat and rifle before heading toward the door. He hesitated, glancing back at Fang. "I'll be back soon. Don't wreck the place." With that, he stepped outside, leaving the wolves alone in his home. Fang's ears twitched. He waited, listening to the sound of boots crunching in the snow. The wind howled as the door shut behind the man, sealing them inside. For the first time, they were alone in a human's den. Luna let out a soft sigh, resting her head on her paws. Echo, satisfied with his small meal, curled up against the blanket. Fang remained standing, his eyes fixed on the door. The man had given them food, warmth, and shelter, but trust was dangerous. Fang wasn't sure if he was ready for it yet. The man opened the cabin door, and a gust of cold air swept inside. The scent of snow and pine filled the small space. Fang tensed but did not move. He watched as the man stepped outside, boots crunching against the fresh layer of snow. For the first time since their arrival, the wolves were alone in the cabin. Luna shifted beside him, stretching her sore limbs. Echo yawned, his tiny jaws parting wide before he blinked up at Fang. He was still too young to understand how much their lives had changed in a single night. Fang remained still, ears pricked toward the door. He listened to the sounds outside, branches creaking under the weight of ice, the distant chirp of a bird braving the cold, the rhythmic crunch of the man's footsteps as he moved through the snow. The temptation was there. They could leave. The door had been left ajar, just enough for Fang to push it open further. He could lead Luna and Echo out into the woods, away from the strange warmth of human kindness. But outside, the snow was deep, the wind biting. They had barely survived the night. Luna's blue eyes met his. She did not speak, but Fang understood her question. "What do we do?" Fang flicked his tail, signaling for her to stay put. For now, they would wait. The man returned before long, shaking snow from his coat as he entered. He carried a bundle of firewood, his breath visible in the cold air. He glanced at the wolves, eyes flicking over them, as if checking that they were still there. "Didn't run, huh?" he murmured, closing the door behind him. Fang said nothing. The man set the firewood near the hearth, then crouched down, poking at the flames with a metal rod. The fire crackled, sending warmth through the room once more. Luna shifted, nudging Echo closer to the heat. The man watched them for a moment before standing. "I've seen wolves before," he said, mostly to himself, "but never this close. Never inside my home." Fang's ears twitched. The man moved to a wooden shelf, pulling down a small box. He opened it, revealing strips of dried meat. He took one and tossed it toward the wolves. Fang caught it midair. The man smirked. "Fast!" Echo sniffed the air, his nose twitching. He inched forward, his small paws silent against the wooden floor. The man crouched, watching him. "You're not afraid, are you?" Echo let out a small huff, more curiosity than caution. He sniffed at the man's boot before retreating. The man chuckled. "You remind me of a pup I had once." Fang stiffened. A human raising a wolf? It was rare, but not impossible. The man sighed, standing again. Didn't end well, though. Silence filled the cabin. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the world remained frozen, still trapped in winter's grasp. The man sat at the table, rubbing his hands together. "You'll have to leave eventually," he said. "I know that." Fang watched him carefully. The man leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling, but not today. Luna closed her eyes, resting her head on her paws. Echo, still full of energy, pounced at a stray piece of cloth near the fireplace, swiping at it with his tiny claws. Fang finally lay down, his body still positioned protectively in front of Luna and Echo. The man was right. They couldn't stay forever, but for now they would. And for the first time, Fang wondered if that was really such a bad thing. The days passed slowly. The man never tried to touch them, never forced them to trust him. He moved about his home as if the wolves were simply part of the space. He cooked, mended his clothes, and spent long hours outside tending to his traps. Sometimes he spoke, not directly to Fang, but more to himself. He told stories in short murmurs about the cabin, about past winters, about a dog he once had. Fang listened, but did not react. Luna, however, began to relax. She no longer flinched when the man moved, no longer kept her body curled so tightly. Echo followed her lead, growing bolder, occasionally trailing after the man when he crossed the room. Fang remained wary. Then one morning something changed. The man opened the door, letting in a burst of cold air. He glanced at Fang, then at the open world outside. "Well," he said, "you coming?" Fang hesitated. Luna lifted her head, watching. Echo yipped excitedly. The man didn't wait. He stepped outside, walking into the snow. He left the door open behind him. Fang stared at it. A test. He stood slowly, his muscles stiff from days of rest. He padded to the doorway, sniffing the crisp winter air. The trees stood silent, their branches heavy with frost. Luna rose beside him. For a long moment, Fang did nothing. Then cautiously, he stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath his paws. The man stood a few paces away, watching. He didn't move closer, didn't speak. Fang's ears twitched. The man nodded slightly, then turned and walked toward the woods. Luna followed. Fang hesitated for only a moment before he too stepped forward. Trust was not given easily, but today it was earned. Fang stepped cautiously through the deep snow, his paws sinking slightly with each movement. Luna followed closely behind, her breath visible in the cold air. Echo bounced beside them, his tiny frame disappearing into the powdery drifts before he wriggled free, yipping with excitement. The man walked ahead, his steps steady, leaving a clear path for the wolves to follow. He carried a rifle slung across his back, but his hands remained relaxed, his movements unthreatening. This was not a hunt. It was something else. The wolves had spent days in the warmth of the cabin, regaining their strength, growing accustomed to the strange presence of the human. But this was the first time they had left the shelter, the first time the man had invited them into his world. The trees loomed tall around them, their branches weighed down by thick layers of ice. Silence filled the forest, broken only by the occasional creak of shifting wood or the distant call of a bird. The storm had passed, but winter still held the land in its grip. Fang moved carefully, his ears pricked for any sound of danger. This was unfamiliar territory. He did not know what lay beyond the trees, did not know if this man, this human, was leading them into a trap. The man stopped. Fang froze instantly, his muscles tensing. The man turned slightly, glancing at him. Then slowly, he crouched and pointed toward the snow. Tracks. Fang stepped closer, sniffing the disturbed powder. The scent was faint but unmistakable. A deer. Luna moved beside him, her nose twitching. Echo tilted his head, curious but uncertain. The man rose to his feet. "Thought you'd want to see this," he murmured. Fang flicked his ears. The man wasn't hunting for himself. He was hunting for them. The realization sent a strange feeling through Fang's chest. No human had ever done such a thing. Humans were takers, not givers. They feared wolves, drove them away, killed them when they got too close. Yet this man had sheltered them, fed them, and now he was helping them find food. Fang looked back at Luna. She met his gaze, understanding without words. They needed this. The hunger never truly left them, only dulled by the warmth of the cabin and the small meals the man provided. But this was survival. Fang lifted his head, sniffing the air. The scent was old, but the deer had passed through recently. If they moved quickly, they could catch up. The man stepped back, giving them space. Fang hesitated only a moment longer. Then he turned and started forward, following the trail. Luna followed, her movements steadier than they had been in days. Echo trailed behind, his small body bounding through the snow. The man did not follow. Fang glanced back once. The man stood where they had left him, watching. He gave a single nod. Then Fang turned away and ran. The hunt was not easy. The deer was fast, its long legs carrying it swiftly through the snow-covered forest. Fang and Luna chased it, their bodies moving in perfect sync, their instincts taking over. Echo stayed behind, too young to keep up, but his excited yips echoed through the trees. Fang pushed forward, his muscles burning. He had not felt this alive in weeks. The chase was long, the cold biting at their fur, but the hunger drove them forward. Finally, after a relentless pursuit, Luna surged ahead, her fangs sinking into the deer's flank. It stumbled, its breath coming in harsh gasps. Fang lunged. His jaws clamped down on its throat, ending the struggle. Silence followed. The snow around them was stained red. Luna panted beside him, her chest heaving. Fang did not move for a moment, his mind catching up with what had just happened. They had done it. For the first time in weeks, they had hunted as they were meant to, as wolves. They returned to the cabin hours later, their bellies full, their bodies warm from the exertion. Echo yipped happily, leaping through the snow as they approached the wooden structure. The man was waiting. He stood on the porch, his arms crossed, watching as they returned. His rifle was still strapped to his back, untouched. He did not seem surprised that they had succeeded. Fang slowed as they reached the steps. The man studied them for a moment, then gave a small, satisfied nod. "Good hunt?" Fang held his gaze. Then in a slow, deliberate motion, he stepped forward and sat at the base of the porch. A choice. Not one made from desperation, not one forced by weakness or need. A choice to stay. Luna moved beside him, settling in the snow. Echo climbed onto the first step, looking up at the man with wide, curious eyes. The man exhaled, a breath of white mist in the cold air. "Well," he murmured, "didn't expect that." He turned, pushing open the door. Warmth spilled from inside, the scent of burning wood mixing with the crisp winter air. He didn't call them in. He didn't need to. Fang stood, shaking the snow from his fur, and padded inside. Luna followed. Echo bounded after them, his tail wagging. The door closed behind them, shutting out the cold. Outside, winter raged on. Inside, a new pack had been formed. A bond not of blood, but of something deeper. A bond of trust, of loyalty, of family.